Before we move on, I think it's really important that we discuss the Green Man, the origins of the Green Man. Why was it so popular? There is not another carving like this that has been repeated so much. And there's certain meanings behind this, and I suppose there could be a lot of interpretation. But throughout all the publications and what I've came across, I'm going to give a little interpretation of what I feel the Green Man was used for. And we'll just begin by explaining some of the blocks. Now, what we see first is what I describe as Block A, mainly based around the Basel area, and certain people would use this block. One of those people we've already looked at, Daniel Mogling. We've already looked at his publications in great depth. The work of Paracelsus in collaboration with Gerhard Dorn. The next block is block B, and we only found two instances of this block, and one was the Fama, well, the Confession. And so block B was very specific for the manifestos. And then we have block C, which I like to call the UK block or the London block, used specifically for people like John Napier in Scotland, Reginald Scott, John Dee, William Shakespeare, also the illustrious Edmund Spenser. There is even a pirate copy of the De Fortis Liberatum Notis from Johannes Baptista Porta, which was a pirate copy, and that is based on cryptography, and we will talk a little bit about that in future videos. Moving on to block D, this block was based mainly around Geneva and was looked more like a copy of a block. It looked more as if it was just something that was used by a specific printer based in Geneva around 1597 to about 1620, used in 4 copies so far, or 4 publications. Nobody of any particular note. It seems just to be a block that was made to suit or resemble blocks that seemed to be popular at the time. Block E is basically just the same. It was used around Rotterdam and about 1613 to 1620. It was anti-Calvinist satire. So there was nothing really, it was used twice. Again, some of these blocks look like they're just being copied because they seem to be popular at the time. Leading on to block F, around 1652, this was used one time, and this was by Elias Ashmole. And we can go into Elias Ashmole's relationships with certain people. But what is interesting is this block in 1652 had been created for this specific alchemical Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum. It's rather a hefty book. And yeah, so if we move on to block G, now this block is very interesting, and we're going to talk about specific things. This block was used in the same copy of the Confession of the Rosy Cross. Other people like Johannes Kepler also used this block, and importantly, William Cecil used this block in London, a very influential person in the UK, and we're going to look closer at this person and the timeline of this block. We also have Tycho Brahe using this block also, and what's quite funny about this, Tycho Brahe actually uses another block, and this will be coming up soon. We also have George Peele of London, The Life and Death of Jack Straw in 1593. He was using this block G, And what's interesting is this block G was used in London before it was used in the Fama. And what's even more interesting is in the same copy, we also have block B. Sorry, I'd like to make a correction on that. Block C, the London block. So what we have here is basically the block being used in the Fama, but before it was used in the Fama, it was used in London. And at the same time that block was used, a brand new block C was also created. Moving on to block H, again, Tycho Brahe managed to get his hands on this block, and I think this looks very familiar with Tycho Brahe. Looking closer, I can see a very large nose on this green block, and Tycho Brahe had an artificial nose. I think this block was made specifically for this gentleman. It only turns up in 2 of the publications that he had, and then no more. So certain people were really looking to associate themselves with this green man with 2 rings. Now, block I and block J, we only found about 5 of these examples, or 6, and they were done by the same printer. Again, they look like very copies, or somebody's tried to adapt something to look very similar. We didn't actually have a block K, so that leaves us moving on to block L. And this block L seemed to be used by just the one person based in Nuremberg as Simon Marius, basically based on astronomy. There's no connections here. Some of these blocks, as you'll see, look as though they are just basic copies or pirates of blocks that they've seen. And then moving on to block M and N, these are blocks that are based around the 1800s. We're going to have to look at these separately. These tell their own story, but something we need to look at later and not right now in this timeline. And this leaves the last block O, and this was used one time, and it's such a low quality copy. Some of these you can just tell they've just been made because they've seen them at another printers, or they've seen a publication that and they like this tale and they tried to make it themselves. So that's my opinion. This is just interpretation. We have all this information, we have the spreadsheet, we can manipulate the information to extract certain things, and I'm going to go through these things. Now we know a little bit about the blocks, I'm going to talk about what I feel may be the reason why the block was created. And what we're looking at here is one of Leonardo da Vinci's knots, like a type of puzzle. He created several of these items, but what really grabbed my attention was the part in the middle and how it really takes the shape of the green man, the badge or the shield emblem that the shape is based off. And I found this quite interesting, and maybe Leonardo da Vinci, maybe he had some part to play in this. And one of his more important paintings, The Last Supper, I just couldn't resist the urge to try this 7-sided tomb. And perhaps it's the way that the painting is created, obviously with the isometric as it's disappearing into the background, the focal point would be the centre of the picture. But I find it very intriguing that the angles that are provided here pick up the corners of the 7-sided tomb, or the heptagon. It's very interesting stuff. So perhaps that is where the concept idea was borrowed from, a Leonardo da Vinci knot. The fact that the knot is an enigma, making you think that there is some sort of puzzle there. And then we need to start thinking about the green man, and perhaps the green man is Pan, the kind of nature, the way it's it's one with nature, and the green man looks as though it's some kind of plume opening or bursting out, and inside we come across the green man. Though it does look like this green man is, uh, how could you say it, is carrying a set of horns. And so perhaps this could be associated with Pan, the fact that Pan does have horns. And it seems to make more sense because Pan with these horns, as described by like Francis Bacon in the essays that he wrote, especially the Wisdom of the Ancients, he talks about Pan there. And in this essay, it actually talks about Pan and a fight or struggle that they had with Cupid. And perhaps this is where the Daniel Mogling video we discussed how we had Cupid in the picture as the two hearts, and then we had Pan, the Pan. So the more we follow this, it seems to all come together. What is quite an interesting concept here, when Francis Bacon talks about Pan, he talks about the horns being antenna, basically, like it's a communication with the gods because they're pointing up and above. It allows for a more direct communication. So these horns that we see could be some kind of really of a there's a message, and then taking into account the Leonardo da Vinci that the message could be a puzzle. And these horns as a messenger has actually been used before. If we take a look of examples of Moses, sometimes he is depicted with horns, especially after when he's been atop of the mountain and he's been in direct contact with God and received his message, the message being the Ten Commandments. I think in the translation it says that when he came down he was radiant, and the root of this word radiant shares the same root as horns, and sometimes Moses is depicted with these horns as some way to show that he's in direct contact with God and carries the message of God. So when we see the Pan, the green man with horns, perhaps the Leonardo da Vinci background with the knot being an enigma, I like to think that this is building up to a story, and it only leaves one last point, and that is the two rings. And what became quite apparent quite quick was, in order for us to actually like, draw a heptagon, it's not an easy task, yet it can be made easy. Well, it can be done using two rings, and not just the one ring repeated. It specifically has to be two rings of a different diameter. So I'll give you a little example of this, and it's just so interesting that the two rings is going to allow us to draw this seven-sided tomb. We have Moses with the horns being a messenger, and our green man picture has these two horns. We have the green man coming out of this bloom, representing a kind of nature or a birth or rebirth. And this nature feel seems to drive me towards Pan, and Pan having horns, and Pan being mentioned before in the Daniel Mogling publication on the front piece. It all seems to come together and tell us a nice little story